The nature of right action. Yoga is inseparable from action, for it provides the how-to of the spiritual part. It is not, however, action with a beginning and an end like worldly deeds. It contains no unfinished acts like worldly actions, the consequences of which can be diverted by what Yogananda called the thwarting cross currents of ego. Every ego-inspired act, moreover, inspires a reaction, but to yoga practice there is no such dualistic reaction, for it is directed towards the termination of karmic activity. This is the teaching of the next stanza. In this part of yoga action, there is no danger of unfinished business, nor are there latent within it the opposite cancelling effects of duality. Even a little practice of this religion will free one from dire fears or colossal suffering which are inherent in the unceasing cycles of death and rebirth. It is important to realize that in yoga practices, as well as, of course, as in any sincere search for God, the one self beyond all duality, there is no wasted effort and no karmic rebound. There is, in other words, no catch to seeking God. With any other effort, no matter how glorious the consequences, it is always legitimate to ask what is wrong with it. Only with the divine search is the answer a resounding nothing is wrong. Even to fail in this quest brings only good karma. Think of other fulfillment in life. Fame. One famous man said, I enjoyed fame at first, but it wasn't long before it turned to ashes. Now it means nothing to me. Money. Howard Hughes, the wealthiest man in the world at the time he lived, was asked if he had found happiness. Hughes responded in bitter tones, No, I can't say I have found happiness. Human love. What a compromise is the most beautiful love story with infinite divine love which the soul experiences at the end of its search for God. Power. Joseph Stalin, the powerful dictator of Russia's Soviet Union, was virtually mad towards the end of his life, fearing that everyone around him wanted to encompass his destruction. Knowledge. Look at the dry faces, the furrowed brows, the bent shoulders of people who have pursued intellectual knowledge all their lives. Hear the brittleness in their voices. No, nothing on earth brings lasting fulfillment, and even if a few people seem to have found fulfillment for a time, none would say that what they have attained is the summum bonum of life. In only one field does perfect unanimity exists in the search for God, and especially in those who have found Him. In every religion, in every country, in every people, those who have found God are in complete agreement. This is the goal of all human striving. Without exception, those who have found him have willingly accepted any persecution, even painful death, to bring this realization to their fellow men. God, they know, is the only worthwhile goal in life. Yet, how often those who seek him are ridiculed and worse than ridiculed. Later on in the Gita, Krishna answers beautifully in words full of hope the question put to him by Arjuna, what happens to those who fail? Already in the present stanza, Krishna is saying no effort on the path to God is ever wasted. This is not to say that there cannot be wrong practices in the service of God. When people practices yoga or other form of religion with wrong or self-serving motives, whatever to develop spiritual power or to obtain control over others, they must pay the karmic price, for they have devoted their energies to dualistic ends and must accept the consequence of pitting their own energies against the energies of others. When there is pure longing for truth and God, however, this stanza of the Gita offers a shining reassurance for everyone. To desire salvation sincerely, even once, is to enter upon the path to eventual freedom. For all desires must be fulfilled. Even so, this one desire, once entrance in the heart, cannot but lead eventually to liberation. Thus, this passage contains one of the most deeply inspired and inspiring passages in all scripture. 2.41 In this yoga, there is only that one direction with no polar opposite, the reasoning of undecided mind, caught up as it is in duality, are endlessly variegated and ramified. Krishna is not only saying that the path to God is undeviatingly straight, but also that one should follow only the path in life. For there are many detours from the search for God in religion, also not to speak of supreme detour of delusion itself. Religious spokesmen hold out pallid explanations for perfection, saying that all God really expects a man is that he be good. Heaven is usually offered as bait, a place where people spend eternity in a beautiful, idyllic environment of great natural beauty surrounded by angels. To the sincere spiritual aspirant, little could seem more hellish than to be stuck for all eternity in an ego, even if the body in which one lives is forever healthy, supple, youthful, and full of energy. Few people can think in terms longer than 1,000 years, the millennium, which Christians have in fact held up to them as a promise of supernal perfection. Now that we know through the science of astronomy that all the stars seen in the sky constitute only the outskirts of a single galaxy, and that there are at least 100 billion galaxies in the physical universe, that figure 1000 seem paltry indeed. Even so, how many people are able to visualize even a million year, a billion, 100 billion? It is inconceivable. Yet divine consciousness is eternal. It is also center everywhere, circumference nowhere, and therefore omnipresent, meaning that it is as consciously present in the largest star as in the smallest mud ball of a planet in the most distant galaxy, indeed as in the smallest pebble in your own yard, and in fact in just one atom of the countless number of them which comprise a speck of dust on that pebble. It is amazing to contemplate how far divine truths have been distorted by so-called religious leaders and spokesmen, priests, imams, rabbis, pandits, and the numerous dignified holders of religious titles all over the world. Indeed, only Hinduism, and I say this as one who was himself raised in Orthodox Christianity, formally teaches moksha or liberation from the very ego itself in union with the omnipresent divine consciousness. Jesus Christ taught it. Few, however, if any, of his self declared followers believed that when he spoke of heaven, he was referring to the same state of moksha, complete liberation. When Christian preachers in church on Sundays speak of the parable of the grain of mustard seed, how many of them understand the comparison Jesus Christ drew between heaven and that little seed, a comparison which has no perceptible relationship with astral heavens they speak about? The heaven Jesus described as the mustard seed grows from minuscule proportion to the size of the great tree on whose branches the bird of the air come and lodge. In the next verse, Matthew 13:33, he compared the kingdom of heaven to the leaven used in making bread which swells the dough that was first formed, growth, expansion. He was speaking of expansion into omnipresence because most religious teachers offer a compromise of lower spiritual truth. They betray their own religion. Paramhansa Yogananda used to say, Jesus Christ was crucified once, but his teachings have been crucified every day throughout Christendom since that time. At first, the dilution may have been deliberate with a view to maintaining control over the flock. Now the churchmen themselves have forgotten, if indeed they ever knew, that the perfection preached by Jesus was not human perfection, veritably a contradiction in terms. What he said was, "Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect." Judaism seems more preoccupied with following the law of Moses than with the soul's eternal salvation or with finding bliss in God communion. Do Jews even believe that it is possible to reach heaven after death? Many of them consider, along with the materialistic scientists, that such question cannot be answered rationally and therefore should not even be addressed. Suffice it, they say, to live a good, God-pleasing life here on earth. Buddhists have gone the same route because Buddha refrained from speaking of God but rather tried to impress on people's mind their needs to make a personal effort to purify themselves. His followers soon into the fallacy of atheism. True, God doesn't really have a human form. He is pure, absolute bliss, infinite, eternal, and ever conscious, as Sankaracharya later claimed. Sankara wanted to persuade people that the form in which they had clothed God was purely for their own devotional upliftment. They were not literal realities. The nirvana of official Buddhism, according to an official document published some years ago in Thailand, is that the bliss of which Sankara spoke lasts only a moment and is replaced immediately by eternal nothingness. Could anyone sincerely strive to attain nothingness? Surely. When the moment arrived for the choice finally to be faced whether to embrace a complete void or to await a later opportunity, the ego will pull back in fear, electing rather to be bodhisattva indefinitely out of pure compassion for mankind. Compassion may be, but it seems natural to prefer this compassion to becoming nothing. Self preservation is the deepest instinct of life. It cannot be, and indeed is not, founded on a delusion, for if it were, how could delusion itself arise out of total non awareness? The very idea defies all logic. How about Islam? How can any pious Muslim believe that his soul will go to heaven for killing an unbeliever? And what is that heaven? Had it ever been described in terms resembling the absolute liberation in omnipresence that is moksha? If only Hinduism declares this highest spiritual truth, surely it is because only Hinduism had not been confined in the straitjacket of a religious organization. It has grown naturally, rather has not been suffocated in the musty air of the official decrees regarding what is and what is not the highest truth. Yogananda was quite caustic on the subject of religious ritual for priestly profit. The Gita, he said once, against the desire even for an astral heaven as the reward for living a holy life on earth. One who desires any heaven short of oneself, oneness with God, the one supreme source of absolute bliss, is in delusion. The Bhagavad Gita teaches the very highest truth, but how many Hindus even get that message? Most of them hope also to reach some limited plane such as Swarga or Vaikunta, images all of a paradise pleasing to the ego. Many people believe the Gita teaches only karma yoga, how to be good, do good, and serve one's fellow men. No uplifting action, of course, is bad. But it must be strictly understood that what Krishna teaches in this passage of the Gita is a truth beyond duality, a truth to which there is no opposite, no possibility of a future fall, and no limitation in ego consciousness of any kind, but absolute freedom in the infinite self. Even samadhi must be sought in a spirit of utter rejection of lesser identification with body, ego, family, and earthly or astral satisfactions. Indeed, to the true yogi, the astral heavens themselves are a lesser ideal and something rather to be shunned than sought. Finally, as my guru wrote, a chronic wanderer in the path of theology seldom tastes even a sip of the pure divine water of truth. He craves only of newly flavored ideational concoction. This desire for untried novelties merely lead one into a desert tracts of intellectual's doubt. The God-thirsty seeker, Yogananda concludes, busies himself into imbibing the nectar of absolute infinite bliss. 2.42 O Partha, Arjuna, fixity in the state of samadhi cannot be theirs who cling to personal power and sense pleasures. Those whose discrimination is blunted by the specious promise of teachers who, ignorant themselves, promise heaven as men's highest reward, imagine nothing higher to exist. Vedic rituals and other outward practice lead not to oneness with God, nor do promises or the hope of superior pleasures of the astral world. All this lead rather to repeated earthly rebirths. Those who, incapable of discriminating between right and wrong, seek personal power and superior sense pleasure, whether on earth or in astral world, after death by the practice of Vedic ritual deepens their ego attachment. They cannot achieve the inner equilibrium that comes through meditation and miss also the one true goal of life, union with God. Even those who follow superficial religious practices may make great sacrifice in their quest for ultimate fulfillment, whether earthly or astral. Alas, they miss the only true goal there is, union with God. Not even the best of karma can bring one to God, for it comes from action performed with ego consciousness, with its attachment to the results of action. Those results, because of that attachment, must return to their source. Good deeds alone cannot win spiritual freedom, for as long as the ego is involved in doing them, as long as other words as one thinks, it was I who did it, there is bondage. More important even than good deeds are the motives behind them. The results of everything one should be given to God. The doing itself should be given to God. Indeed, in the last analysis, it is He alone who does everything. This is not a counsel to passivity. One should do his best always, but at the same time, he should hold the thought which alone leads to self realization that the higher power lives in him, works through him, and enjoys everything through him. As Yogananda said, pray in this way: I will reason, I will act, but guide thou my reason, will, and activity to the right path in everything. Attachment and desires are like radio static. They prevent the clear reception of the program one is trying to hear. The mind should be free of such static which keeps it constantly restless. Reincarnation for any reason other than as a free soul to return here to help others is a cause for deep regret. Think of the virtually lost years in a person's life: infancy, childhood, adolescent, youth, much of which time is usually wasted in merely preparing himself for one more struggle to achieve success, to learn a few lessons, how very few usually, before one retires, sinks to physical and then perhaps mental incompetence and then dies. Spiritual karma does impel one upward, but environment also exerts a strong influence. Will one's karma be strongly spiritual enough under every circumstance to keep one arrow straight on the path to God? One cannot be wholly sure. Detours may take one temporarily off the path. What person in his right mind, once he knows that the goal of life is the realization of God, would want to risk a renewal of ignorance in yet another body before good karma reawakens him to the understanding that what he really wants in life is God alone? And unless a person is already highly advanced spiritually, the likeliness of getting caught to such an extent that extrication becomes difficult, even if possible, is simply too great. Think of weeping mothers, life after life, scolding wives, domineering husbands, wayward children, and outraged neighbors, all of them conspiring to hold one to the wheel of rebirth. Wise is he who, when the chance comes to seek God, seizes it with both his hands. The Vedas teaches that the universe is a mixture of three basic qualities or gunas. Your duty, Arjuna, is to free yourself from all three as well as from the qualities of nature. The way to this achievement is to remain ever calm in the self, free from any thoughts of either acceptance or possession. Between the opposites of duality, there is a middle state, which either divides or unites them. Every ocean waves has a crest, a base, and a middle part. That middle part divides, as we said, but it also unites. Large waves produce towering crests. Such are the egoists of this world, boasting of their prowess, striving to outdo all others, and combating one another in fierce competition. During a great storm, the ocean surface is greatly agitated and knows no peace. The waves not only rise high, they crash against one another as if each one wanted to beat down the waves around it. In life, too, large egos know little peace. The further they try to distance the ego from the calm ocean depth by emphasizing their individuality, their likes and dislikes, their ambitions, and their zeal for victory, the more restless and agitated they become in their hearts. Even the tallest wave, however, has its base in the vast ocean. Every human being, similarly, is fundamentally part of God and is therefore in essence divine. God dwells in each ego. Though many egos try to avoid any reminder for his inner presence by affirming their own importance, thus the part closest to the ocean is covered over and unseen as people's ego tower high and they send energy out eagerly through the senses in their search for pleasure, excitement, power, and dominion over other. The part closest to the ocean represents sattva guna, that qualify which most clearly suggests the ocean's calm depth. For any protrusion to exist on ocean, however, there must always be those three portions of the wave. The lowest part, which is closest to the ocean, the middle part, which rises in eagerness for self-definition, and the highest part or crest, which acts as though it wanted to affirm its independence from the ocean altogether. In the humblest saint there cannot but still exist all three parts to his wave of manifestation, for everything in manifestation is a composite of three gunas or qualities, sattva, rajas, and tamas. Tamas or tamoguna is that part of the wave of manifestation which projects furthest from its basic reality and which most obscure the very existence of that reality. In this sense, spiritually darkened souls, blinded by egotism, possess what they think of as an entirely separate reality of their own. Rajas or Rajoguna represents the main portion of the wave, the central part, which gives substance to the wave and support the towering arrogance suggested by the crest. The further a person projects his consciousness away from his source in God, bringing his ego and inflating it as if like a balloon, the further he divorces himself from his true self or power. Egotist usually produces a great deal of sound and fury, but in their every pride they cut themselves off from their inner strength, narrowing it down to a little crest which often becomes a mere white cap and thereby grows weak. We all have heard the saying, pride goes before a fall. As a wave loses supportive power, as it projects too far from its base, it crashes. Tamoguna is dullness and inertia, a consequence of the time spent of ego. This image is not perfect. No image can be. There are also, for example, egos that are not so much projected outward from the ocean bosom by pride as simply too dull to perceive any reality deeper than the ego. Their wave, therefore, may be sluggish rather than over exuberant. Such might be the case, for example, on ocean surface after an oil spill. Nevertheless, the reality of their vast source is least apparent at the top of the wave and most obvious at its base. The strength of a wave to rise comes from its central portion, from the agitation produced by the wind, and from the inner upward push of the water. Rajoguna is active, restless, ambitious, pushy. It is that which, thrusting itself outward towards ego affirmation ends in dwindling power of a wave crest falling or the rounded but still greater separation from its source. In all cases, the crest of a wave represents tamoguna. Sattva guna is, as we have seen, the part of the wave which provides its base, not that power which surges upward, but rather one which hugs the ocean, um, which hugs the ocean, knows whence it derives its power, and if the wave is only a low swell, seems hardly separate from the ocean at all. Saintly people may be described as little waves or even ripples. They are ever conscious of being close to God. Even they, however, to the extent that they retain individual awareness, manifest all the three gunas, even though their principal manifestation is sattva guna. That part of their nature which is furthest from God represents their insignificant measures of tamoguna, which even saints must manifest tamoguna to some extent. If they didn't, they would not be able to be manifested at all. They may do so, for instance, when they sleep or when they rest idly. The degree of tamas they manifest them might even be considered sattvic in some people, for all creation expresses the directional relativity of closest, furthest from the source. Rajoguna is the middle ground. Thus, also the duality of nature is implied in the universal blend of the three gunas. Arjuna was urged to rise above identification with the three gunas and therefore also with the oppositional state of duality. Krishna told him to separate himself from outward identity by attaining absolute inner calmness. Inner detachment involved laying to rest the urge of the ego to keep on defining itself as a separate individual reality. Ego consciousness is the inner urge to push the wave of one's individuality ever upward, hoping finally to tower above other waves. Again, no image can be perfect. In the case of the ocean, it is the wind primarily which raises waves on the ocean surface. In the case of the ego, it is the wind of delusion which, in a sense, sweeps over the world, confusing people as to essential nature of reality. The power of delusion, however, comes primarily from within each person, not from outside him. It is inner delusion which causes him to err in his response to outer circumstances. The primary need on the path to wisdom is to overcome the ego's urgency to declare outwardly and affirm inwardly its own separate individuality. Later on in the Gita, Krishna proposes important ways by which this urge can be diminished and overcome. All of these ways he suggests here also requires that one seek his answer primarily within himself. Scripture itself is no substitute for self-effort. 2.46 To the knower of Brahman, the Supreme Spirit, the Vedas are of no more use than a well when the land all over one is in flood. There is a story from the life of Saint Francis of Assisi in Italy. An old nearly blind beggar woman asked him for alms. She couldn't see that he was dressed as poorly as she and was not likely to have anything to give her. It distressed him, however, that he had nothing to give her, and then he realized that he still had one thing in his possession, his well-thumbed copy of the Holy Bible. This he gave it to her in the hope that she might be able to sell it for a few coins. He then prayed almost apologetically, God, Lord, in helping this poor old woman, I have given away your word. A voice within him replied, Francis, I have planted my word in your heart. You have no need for that merely printed copy of it. Whether it be the Vedas, the Gita, the Bible, or any other scripture, the important thing is that God's truth be written on the pages of one's own heart. For of course, Krishna is speaking here not only of the Vedas but of through scripture generally. His reference to the Vedas, however, provides an opportunity for writing about them specifically without breaking the flow in the commentary by including the thoughts of Yogananda expressed about them. The Vedas are unique among the world's scripture in that they are composed in a high age when there was no division such as exists today between religion and daily existence. The people then had no need for separate places of time or times of worship. All life to them was, in a sense, worship, and every act an offering to God. As people's understanding declined in a descending world, it became necessary to write down in words the truth people had been able to memorize effortlessly at that time, an explanation for the gunas, for the duality inherent in all things, and for how everything came into existence became necessary. In the descending age, it was seen to be necessary also to offer people religious practices that would help them to satisfy their increasing worldly and ego affirming needs, rituals that would enable them to gain what they wanted in terms of power, mates, children, and success, although people's consciousness was diminishing in clarity. There was still a spiritual bias in everything they did. Rituals were therefore created that would enable human beings to work in cooperation with the devas, or astral beings of higher angelic nature, as well as with lower sorts to accomplish their ends. Today, mankind has all but forgotten those higher, or at any rate subtler entities which otherwise would help man in the production of food, of good weather, of energies for success, and of countless benefits from which more aware people living in tune with nature seek help as a matter of course. People scoff at nature spirits such as fairies, but as Swami Sri Yukteswar is quoted in Autobiography of a Yogi as saying they actually exist. Man's indifference to them had been causing those energies gradually to withdraw from our planet. This is a natural consequence of the facts of those beings finding themselves ignored. Scientists have actually said that there is less energy in today's food than there was a century ago. People who try to boost their production by chemical means doesn't understand that life depends on the life force and not on that which is lifeless. The astral entities in past ages were objects of worship. An attitude of awe is unnecessary. It is quite enough to give them appreciation, even love, as one ought indeed to love all God's creature as his outward manifestations. To worship them, however, as began happening during the declining age as human understanding grew weaker, is to enter bit by bit into the merchant consciousness that says, I will give you what you want, provided you give me something in return. Thus, the nature spirits, not themselves without ego, enjoy the special worshipful attention they get from people who look to them for particular favor. Krishna, during the time when he taught the Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna, needed to address also this defect in popular consciousness. Buddha, who lived possibly some 2 centuries later, warned people even more strongly against dependence on the Vedas and on the rituals as alternatives to self purification. Krishna is saying in this stanza, even essentially not to propitiate the lesser gods of natural forces whose attitude is still quid pro quo in the sense of wanting some sort of ego payment for favors rendered. The Lord is no merchant. Those who sincerely want Him ask for nothing in return, but pray selflessly only for His love. What Krishna is saying then is seek the direct experience of God. Don't be satisfied with anything less. As Jesus Christ also said, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these other things shall be added unto you. It is the true seeker whom Sri Krishna addresses in this passage, as indeed in most of this great scripture, those who seek lesser favors from God are asking for a teaspoon of soil when they might have the whole kingdom. The problem in people's mind, of course, is that they think to possess. What Krishna is asking of them is that they become. The ego alone can own things, at least in imagination. The soul becomes one with God and in that oneness possesses the whole universe. A great woman saint in India was once asked to visit another country. Why should I go there? She replied, I am there already. Action 2.47 Action in this realm of vibration is a duty. But let not your ego crave the fruits of action. Be not attached either to action or to inaction. Be like a divine lark who enjoys singing without trying to impress or to gain anything from anyone. Those who act with ego motivation becomes caught in the web of Maya. The universe was brought into existence through the power of cosmic vibration, the great sound of Om. So long as one lives in the realm of manifestation and is not merged in spirit, he cannot avoid acting in some way. The important thing is to act rightly. To attain God consciousness, it is necessary to release all attachment to the thought of I and mine. The infinite consciousness appears finite in the ego as in the atom. This is merely an appearance, however. The atom cannot help whirling in its own minuscule reality, but the ego, being conscious, can aspire to be released from all vibratory manifestation. As Patanjali wrote, Yoga's chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga is the neutralization of whirling eddies of feeling. The spiritual duty of every ego is to stop the movement it generates by achieving release from such whirling thoughts as everything I do is for my own personal benefit. Bondage to delusion consists of nothing but the constant reference of everything one does and thinks and enjoys and suffers back to one's own self. Not only action but all one's enjoyments in this world, indeed one's suffering also, are tainted by the simple thought, I am the doer, I am the enjoyer, and I am the sufferer. And then the outraged demand, but why am I the sufferer? The solution is not to refrain from acting. Some people, many hermits, for example, think to develop spirituality by refraining from all action. The idea is a delusion. As long as one must breathe, think, and move, he cannot rightly claim to be inactive. The yogi who sits breathless and motionless in samadhi is a different case. To go beyond action, you must merge your consciousness in the cosmic sound of Om, allowing it to act through you and around you until you merge into that infinite vibration and then pass beyond vibration itself into the calm consciousness of the Supreme Spirit. As long, however, as you are conscious of having a body, you will only be deceiving yourself if you try to achieve the actionless state of not acting. All you will become in time is lazy and dull minded. To reach God, one must first learn to act without selfish motive, for God, not for personal reward. Indeed, it is necessary to be intensely active for God. If one would develop that intense awareness which alone lifts one superconscious, lazy people will not find God. In everything you do, however, feel that God is acting through you. Wash your body, feed it, give it rest. Do everything that is needed to maintain the body in good health and filled with energy, but always feel it is God I am serving through this physical instrument. The very enjoyment of good food, of beautiful scenery, of the good things of life can be offered up to God. Share those enjoyments with Him rather than depriving yourself of them. What need to be released are the thoughts I am doing, I am enjoying. Even the thought, it is I who am suffering. Even in meditation, it is important not to meditate with desire for the result, to eliminate the strain and tension of trying to concentrate. Release also the thought, I am meditating. Think rather, the cosmic vibration is reaffirming through me its own reality. Cosmic love through me is yearning for God's love. Cosmic joy through me is rejoicing in our infinite beloved. 2.48 O Dhananjaya, Arjuna, immerse yourself in the thought of yoga, union with God. Inwardly, non-attached and even-minded in both success and failure. Perfect evenness of mind and feeling is itself the definition of yoga. The only way to achieve the perfection described here is by meditation. Affirmations of calmness in the midst of stress often have the contrary effect of creating more tension. In any calmness can be affirmed effectively only with inner calmness. Such calmness can hardly be established without also stilling the thoughts in meditation. Action performed with desire for the fruits is greatly inferior to action guided by wisdom. Therefore, O Dhananjaya, seek in everything to be guided by wisdom. Misery attends action performed for their fruits. One who lives united to cosmic wisdom passes beyond the effect of both virtue and vice even while he lives in this body. Therefore, devote yourself through wisdom to achieving the oneness of yoga. Such alone is right action. Those who have mastered their thoughts escape the confines of the mind and become engrossed in cosmic wisdom. They, realizing the illusory nature of ego, become freed from the chains of rebirth and attain the state which transcends all suffering. Sorrow was not a deliberate part of God's plan. Inherent in the plan was that actions performed in contradiction to it would cause pain. That was an impersonal necessity. For if the heat of a stove, for instance, did not burn us when we touch it, we would have no protection against possible damage to the body. Our pain is also our protection and not a sign that God wants us to suffer. Legends has it that when God first manifested the universe, he made it perfect. Men and women, realizing the need for living in perfection, sat in meditation and soon merged back into Brahman. One or more similar attempts were made, all of them with the same result. God then decided, I must impose delusion on people. They must struggle, advance by trial and error, and discover that kind of action and that attitude towards it which will lead them to bliss and freedom. Thus, it is what we find ourselves in this pickle. Scriptures such as Bhagavad Gita are intended to lead men out of Maya, labyrinthine ways, into the free air of communion with the infinite source of all bliss. When your perception pierces the dark mist of delusion, you will be indifferent to everything you have heard about this world and the next. You will, in other words, be firmly established in the perception of truth. When your discrimination is no longer tossed about by opinions but abides unshaken in soul bliss, then you will attain final union with God. Arjuna said, O Kesava, Krishna, what are the signs of one who had attained calm wisdom and is established in union with God? How does he speak, sit, walk? The question Arjuna asked is a natural one for those who are not yet enlightened to ask. How does the man of God behave? Can this saintliness be discerned from his way of speaking, of sitting, of walking? Are there other ways, Arjuna implies, in which such a person differs from ordinary people? Krishna's answer, as we shall see, refers to the cause of saintly behavior rather than to its effect. A divine person is not essentially different from anyone else. It is his inner consciousness which creates whatever dissimilarities there are. The yogi. Since Krishna doesn't answer this question directly, though it may well be of interest to many people, reveals a joyful magnetism in the very tone of his voice. In my Guru's case, whether he scolded or encouraged, lectured, sometimes in thundering tones to a crowd or spoke quietly with a small group, there was always vibrant in his tone of voice a quality of calm bliss and wisdom. The yogi sits straight as my guru always did, allowing the energy to move freely in the spine. When he walks calmly, not restlessly or with jerky movements. His walk reveals his consciousness of being centered in the spine. 2.55 O Partha, Arjuna, one who has put away all desires, being wholly contented in the self, may be considered settled in wisdom. His very movement and gestures, in other words, reveal his inner state of consciousness. His voices His voice vibrates with calm wisdom. His posture is calm, not restless, and demonstrates perfect contentment. His walk is relaxed and serene. One day, Yogananda, as a young man teaching the principle of yoga in America, was late for a lecture he had to give and set off at a run to make the appointment as soon as possible. Someone cautioned him, "Don't be nervous. One can run nervously," the master replied, "or one can run calmly, but not to run when the need arises is to be lazy." 2.56 He whose consciousness is unshaken by affliction and is not excited by good fortune, who no longer hungers for earthly affection and is without fear and anger. Such a man deserves to be considered a Muni of steady discrimination. Muni means one who have dissolved his ego consciousness in God. He has withdrawn his consciousness from the distorted testimony of the senses. Fear is born of the thought of failure. If one is attached to success, anger is born of frustrated desire. The Muni is beyond all such egocentric emotion. Okay, let me repeat that again. Fear is born of the thought of failure if one is attached to success. Anger is born of frustrated desire. The Muni is beyond all such ego-centered emotions. 2.57 He who under all circumstances is without attachment and neither elated by goodness nor depressed by evil is a man of established wisdom. As the swan glides over water without its body being touched by it, so the man of wisdom glides through the water of life unaffected by them. Paramhansa Yogananda often used the analogy of the movies, pointing out how they create an illusion of reality by simply mixing shadows and light, and more recently by the addiction of colors, all of which are only projections of the one light shining out of the projector. An enlightened sage is unaffected inwardly by the movie of life. That doesn't mean he is heartless or indifferent. His impersonality derives from not desiring anything for himself. Otherwise, because his perception of everything and everyone is from within, he feels keen sympathy for all and for their sake rejoices in their good and grieves with them in their sorrow. He also grieves for the evil and for what it will do to them. His only desire, if out of compassion he still has any desire, is to help others to know God. 2.58 When the yogi, like a tortoise withdrawing its head and limbs into its shell, is able to withdraw his energy from the objects of sense perception, he becomes established in wisdom. Control of what Yogananda used to call the sense telephone is essential for deep meditation. Sense control by withdrawal of the energy is the true meaning of pranayama, yama, control of the prana, energy. Pranayama is a condition, not a technique. The practice of pranayama is to achieve energy control. This stanza offers one proof out of many that the Bhagavad Gita, while embracing all paths to God, places special emphasis on Raja Yoga in that it teaches how to achieve the goal, union with God, and doesn't merely say seek God. Prana is often equated with the breath and pranayama with breathing exercise. In fact, there is an intimate connection between the breath and the flow of energy in the body. Paramhansa Yogananda often said, breathlessness is deathlessness. Yogic breathing exercise have the purpose of enabling the practice to rise above the body's normal need for breath. Breathlessness is not kumbhaka in the sense of forcibly retaining the breath. Rather, true kumbhaka comes when the body no longer requires air for its maintenance. The purpose of respiration is to expel carbon dioxide from the lungs and to take in oxygen. In pranayama exercises, the breath is used to produce a state of equilibrium in the body in which the state of physical activity or breathing is no longer required to maintain it in a condition of equilibrium. When one rises above the need to breathe, the heart pump also slows down and then stops altogether. There is a subtle connection through the medulla oblongata between the breath and the heartbeat. When the breathing becomes unnecessary, the heartbeat, as just indicated, slows down and then stops. Between these two phenomena, the breath and the heartbeat on the one hand and sensory awareness on one, there is a close connection. The energy in the senses, as in the whole body, relaxes and withdraws, as happen indeed to a lesser degree in sleep. A sleeper may be called, he may even be shaken before he is even aware of being wanted. This diminished involvement with objective reality occurs because during sleep the energy is partially withdrawn from the body and from the sense telephones, even as the tortoise withdraws its head and limbs into its shell. It is only when the sense telephones have been switched off that the mind can wholly absorb itself in the inner world in meditation. The energy in the motor nerves too must be withdrawn, as happens naturally. The senses are being still. The center of the body's energy is in the spine. In deep meditation, the energy must be relaxed from the surface of the body, as we saw earlier, and withdrawn up the spine through the chakras to the brain. The normal outward flow of energy as it works to sustain the body must be reversed to flow upward. It may be helpful at this point to pause briefly and consider the relation between the breath and the flow of energy in the spine. First, when the spine is concerned, come the two superficial nerves known as Ida and Pingala, who are located respectively on the left and right side of the spine. Fish eaters will be familiar with the two nerves that run the full length on either side of the spine of a fish. The energy flowing in these superficial nerves is connected with the reactive process of the emotion, which in turn is connected with the breath. The upward flow of energy in the astral spine through what is called Ida Nadi nerve channel in the astral body is the cause of inhalation. The downward flow through the Pingala Nadi is the subtle cause of exhalation. It is this flow of energy in the astral spine that result in the physical breath. Otherwise, there will be no physical compulsion to breathe. One wouldn't know what to do about the body's need to expel carbon dioxide and bring in the revivifying oxygen. Causing the inhalation then is the upward energy flow. This upward flow is the superficial spine is reminiscent of the deeper flow upward in deep meditation towards spiritual enlightenment. The upward flow through Ida therefore accompanies any positive emotional reaction. Thus, with a positive reaction of any kind, joyful, hopeful, triumphal to some upward stimulus, the energy flows automatically upward in the spine, causing the lungs to inhale. When, by contrast, one's reaction is negative, pained, sorrowful, despairing, the energy automatically flows downward through Pingala. An exhalation ensures. Thus, when for whatever reason one reacts with emotional delights to any stimulus physically, emotionally, or mentally, he automatically inhales, and when on the contrary, one reacts negatively, he exhales. That is why when we feel emotionally pleased, we automatically inhale deeply, and when we feel disappointed, we automatically sigh. Obviously, the breathing process is not invariably accompanied by positive and negative emotional reaction. It would be ridiculous to smile and frown alternatively every time one Inhale and exhale. The consciousness rests ordinarily in one or more of the spinal chakras. Worldly people, those that is to say, whose interest is primarily in sense enjoyment and particularly in the thought of sensual pleasure, have their consciousness centered in one or more of the lower three chakras, one or more of the three lower chakras, especially in the two lowest one. Spiritual minded persons, on the other hand, especially those with devotional nature, feel their consciousness centered in the Anahata chakra or heart center. Even when one is centered in the Anahata, one must be careful if he is a spiritual aspirant. He must try to keep his energy flowing upward from the heart to the spiritual eye. Unless he is careful, his energy is suddenly attracted by some wakened desire, however unexpectedly rush downward energy from the heart into the lower chakra. The energy must be continually drawn upward by the magnetism emanating from the kutastha, where the spiritual eye is seen, lest it descend inadvertently in response to some worldly stimulus. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, a scripture which also was written by Vedavyas, the co-author of the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita, the counsel is given to visualize the heart as a lotus, the petals of which must be turned up towards the brain. The best point on which to keep focus is in the spiritual eye at the point between the eyebrows. The center of the ego is the Agya chakra in the medulla oblongata. Hence, the advice is also given to center one's mind there, its natural position, and from that point to gaze forward so as to speak at the spiritual eye. Life begins its involvement with the objective world with the baby's first cry, or rather with the first quick breath required to make that first cry. This first breath starts the reactive process and therefore begins the baby's involvement in the objective world. This movement is crucial to the baby's earthly existence. The moment of its first cry, therefore, is the point from which the horoscope for the baby should be computed. At death, by contrast, that is what is known as the death rattle, the final exhalation which occurs as energy enters the Pingala Nadi and the ego's energy flows inward more deeply and back to the medulla. Thus, it prepares for its departure from the body, exiting through the same doorway by which it first entered when the sperm and ovum united to create the body. The spiritually advanced yogi's energy enters the deep spine on exhalation and flows up through the susumna to the spiritual eye in the forehead, the kutastha, where the spiritual eye appears, is the positive pole of which the medulla oblongata is the negative. Yogis and saints in other religions who are able to exit the body through the spiritual eye need not pass through what the ancient Greeks, as we said earlier, called the waters of Lethe. In other words, yogis do not sink back temporarily as ordinary human egos do into subconscious rest, but soar out into superconsciousness. The yogi learns to withdraw his attention from reactive process, first of all by calming the feelings in the heart, which initiates the reactive process, one which detach his feelings from the ups and downs of reactive energy in the spine, from the subjective influence of success and failure, fulfillment and disappointment, attraction and repulsion, love and hatred, pleasure and pain, joy and sorrow, triumph and despair. It is helpful when trying to develop emotional detachment to concentrate one's energy in the spine and there to equalize the upward and downward flow of energy which produce emotional reaction and are intricately united to those reaction as long as the heart's feelings remains restless. Finally, the yogi withdraws his energy into the deep spine, the sushumna. With this withdrawal, he awakens Kundalini, which, being magnetized to flow upward, now begins its slow ascent through the deep spine through enlightenment. Beginning yogis should try to become conscious of the connection between their reactive emotions, both positive and negative, and the corresponding upward and downward flow of energy in the Ida and Pingala nadis. This practice of centeredness in the spine will minimize their preoccupation with whatever occurs outwardly in their life and with what had already occurred in the past. The practice will focus the attention on the simple movement of energy in the spine, thus, where most people's first thought is how wonderful or how dreadful the yogi, even if he is a beginner in yoga practice, find it relatively easy to cease from defining outer occurrences as either good or bad. If, for example, one is sitting in a dentist's chair having work done that most people might find quite painful, he should concentrate at the kutastha, or if he is conscious of feeling any emotional reaction, concentrate on the energy flow in the spine. First calm the heart's feeling, then breathe in the spine with deep, slow inhalation and exhalation silently so as not to disturb the poor dentist, bringing the energy upward and downward and seeing that flow as the cause of an emotional reactions one might feel. Again, when anything or anyone threatens you in any way, not only physically but by speaking angrily or perhaps insulting or accusing you, center yourself in the spine. At that center, you will become confident that nothing can touch you. As Yogananda said, you must be able to stand unshaken amidst the crash of breaking worlds. The above practice will help to ready you for facing any circumstances in life. 2.59 The men who merely abstain from sense enjoyment may forget them for a time, but the taste of them will linger. The person, however, who beholds the Supreme Spirit loses the taste for anything but the infinite. An example Paramhansa Yogananda often used was a person who is accustomed to stale cheese and had acquired a liking for it. If he is given good fresh cheese to taste, however, he automatically abandons the liking he had for stale cheese. 2.6 O son of Kunti, the power of dispassion, Arjuna, even the wise man devoted to self-control may sometimes be swept away by the turbulent senses. No devotee should underestimate the formidable power of subconscious tendencies. Their tendencies are further reacting than anything the conscious mind can perceive or even imagine. Paramhansa Yogananda warns that as long as ego consciousness perceives, one should not consider himself safe from delusion. Remember, you will not be safe until you reach Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Even in the lower Samadhi stage, as Sabhikalpa, the ego must return from its infinitely expanded consciousness to outward awareness. One who reaches Sabhikalpa Samadhi, therefore, can still fall. My guru told me of more than one case in which this has happened. Sadhu, beware. The great master Sri Ramakrishna once warned a disciple who subsequently did fall from the spiritual path. The thing to watch out for is the slightest flicker of excitement in the heart in the contemplation of any aspect of delusion. The little stir of energy should be seen as the first warning signal. The slightest stirring in the heart should be a sign to the aspiring yogi to withdraw immediately from even the thought of delusion. Maya is very subtle. Never try to tough it out. You cannot by any means be sure you will win, if only because the very discrimination with which you think to do battle is already infected by the disease of Maya. 2.61 He who has subjugated his senses has become united with me, remain and grows in the infinite self. Knowing it as a supremely realizable only mastery of the senses can bestow the steadfastness of true wisdom. There are two requirements above all for the attainment of wisdom. One, to withdraw the mind not only from sense objects, but from the sense themselves, and two, to remain merged in the consciousness of God as the most desirable of all goals. Yogis who seek only to control their bodies and physical senses, and those also who seek only the abstraction of divine union without proper physical and mental discipline, can never achieve true fixity of purpose. Uprooting the weeds of ego gratification on the one hand to their last tendril, and on the other becoming lovingly absorbed in the infinite, both of these are essential. Many yogis seek ego gratification not only through sensory pleasures but in the development of spiritual powers. Many others again seek the ego gratification abstraction of intellectual wisdom. The true yogi seeks only to unite his soul with the divine beloved. 2.62 and 2.63 Dwelling mentally on sense object breeds attachment to them. From attachment arises craving. From craving, when frustrated, springs anger. Anger produces delusion. Delusion causes forgetfulness of the self. Loss of memory as to what is in truth causes decay of the power of discrimination. From loss of discrimination ensures the annihilation of all right understanding. Every step in this descent has a single linchpin, the ego. To rise again towards wisdom, the deluded ego must reach the point where it realizes that what it has understood of life so far has brought it nothing but pain. Its first question then must be, do I like suffering? No, obviously. Next, it should be, what increases suffering and what, on the other hand, lessen it? The answer is, suffering diminishes when there is a decrease of self-interest. The discernment of this truth leads to the first faint stirrings of recollection that a reality exists that is more than the ego and the body. The fog of delusion begins to lift from the mind, and one no longer strikes out at the world in anger for not giving him what he wants. From acceptance of what is becomes a gradual decrease of worldly attachment. From lessened attachment comes lessening interest in the objects of the senses and an increase of longing for true wisdom, a longing which awakens devotion in the heart, love of truth, and intense aspiration to know true and everlasting bliss. 2.64 The man of perfect self control is able to act in this world unaffected by it. Inwardly free from attraction and repulsion, he has attained unshakable inner calmness. That state, as we have seen from what Yogananda said above, come only when one's conscience has passed beyond condition, sabhikalpa, to unconditioned, nirbhikalpa samadhi. When one's consciousness has become so established in oneself with God that there is no possibility of a return to outwardness and the limitations of the ego. 2.65 With the attainment of soul bliss, every vestige of sorrow disappears. Bliss gives perfect discrimination and soon establishes one's consciousness firmly in the self. 2.66 Those with unsettled consciousness have no discrimination. Those who are unmeditative cannot know peace. And for those who lack peace, how is happiness possible? 2.67 As a boat moving on water may be swept off its course by a gale, so discrimination may be swept from its path by the vagaries of sensory influence. The words to a favorite chant of Paramhansa Yogananda's go as follows: I have made the polestar of my life. Through my sea is dark and my stars are gone. Still I see the path through thy mercy. The spiritual seeker may on occasion find himself swept off his outward course by outward temptations, not only sensory pleasures but a desire for less tangible temptations offered to the individual by Maya to feed his ego consciousness, name, fame, power, self importance, and a host of other ego boosting delusions. Instead of agitating himself with guilt, feelings, and self accusation, which can only increase his susceptibility to delusion, he should return calmly to his pre established course. Mistakes on the path are always possible. The devotee should acknowledge them, at least to himself, sincerely and openly, and then simply forsake them without making the further mistake of becoming upset with himself. He should find his mind focused steadfastly on the pole star of his true goal, union with God. Since the ego is a delusion, anything that tempts it to affirm its own reality is a delusion also. And so too indeed is any distress one may feel with oneself for having succumbed to delusion. When a rock is dropped into a pond, wave appears. Similarly, when anything occurs in one's life to cause an emotional reaction, waves of feeling appear. As those waves created by the rock flow outward to the bank, then return, they only gradually subside to calmness again. Even so, one's reaction to anything outward may flow back and forth, compounding the mistake made by reacting in the first place. One should make it a practice indeed to separate himself in his mind from identification with anything, even an identity of thought, and to return to affirmation. God alone is the doer. By thus dissociating oneself from any error the ego commits, the tendency to err will gradually subside. The gale will cease to blow, and the mind will become calmly centered and focus on its divine goal once again. Otherwise, what can happen when one errs spiritually is that by ego identification with the error, one might wander for further incarnations, straying into other dead ends, and struggling all the while to find his way back to the true course on which he once embarked. 2.68 Therefore, O mighty arm Arjuna, withdraw your sense faculties, the power to see, hear, etc., from the sense themselves and from sense objects. Thus will your wisdom become firmly established. 2.69 That which is night for the unenlightened is day for the yogi, and that which is day for ordinary people is night for the yogi seer, which who perceive the inner reality. This passage contains more than one meaning. Superficially, it recommends meditating at night when the mind of the worldly people are still in sleep, when the sound they make during daily activity no longer fill the air, and when the yogis find it easier to achieve inner calmness. Thus, the time when the worldly people bestir themselves once again in what the yogis might find it more convenient to get his few hours of sleep. On a deeper level, what seems real to the worldly person living as he does in the conscious mind is seen to be unreal at a superconscious level. The eager activity of the worldly person holds no interest for the man of wisdom, even when the wise person, in order to sustain his existence, engages in outward activity and is thus, in a sense, in the world. He is not of it, for the world no longer defines his reality. 2.70 Contentment in is he who, like the ocean, calmly absorbs into himself all the rivers of desire. 1. On the contrary, whose desire trickles outward as if from a pond, is soon drained of energy. Generous desires, for example, to bring joy to others, do not drain your reservoir of peace, but add to it by the joy they awaken. Whenever you feel pleasure, let it remind you of soul bliss inwardly. Whenever you see beauty, take into yourself the joy you feel in it. Let every worldly happiness remind you of the much greater happiness of the self. Some yogis recommend complete indifference to the world. What a dry outlook. Far better is it, my Guru taught, to enjoy with God the beauties and the pure delights of this world by focusing on the inner joy you bring during experiences that uplifts the heart's feeling. Raise those feelings towards God rather than suppressing them with dry intellectual inspired apathy. In this way, too, one can absorb into himself instead of leaking outward whatever joys and pleasures the world give him. 2.71 That person know peace who, relinquishing all energy draining desires and fully satisfied with his state of desirelessness, no longer sees himself as a separate individual ego. The ego lies at the root of all delusions. Producing the plant of material desire, it is like a noxious weed, choking and killing the more wholesome plants of devotion, self control, kindness, and other uplifting soul qualities. When one is fully satisfied in the self, desireless and free from every attachment, one no longer sees himself as a separate wave on the ocean of spirit, but realizes his true self to be infinite and one with the ocean. 2.72 O Partha, Arjuna. This state is known as Brahmasthiti, absolute oneness with the infinite. Anyone who achieves this state will never again fall into delusion, even at the moment of death. If one concentrates wholeheartedly on this state, he attains perfect eternal bliss. Dr. M. W. Lewis, Paramhansa Yogananda's first Kriya Yoga disciple in America, once asked the master, "Can you resolve this dilemma for me? Is liberation a state one achieves only for this day of Brahma? Will we, when Brahman manifests itself again in creation, be obliged to emerge from the oneness once more and go through the whole long struggle again?" "Never fear," the master replied. "Once the soul has achieved final freedom in spirit, it is free forever." Such is the aim of the Bhagavad Gita, to help sincere seekers to find the way to perfect union with Satchidananda, ever existing, ever conscious, ever new bliss. Thus ends the second chapter called Sankhya Yoga of the Upanishad of the Holy Bhagavad Gita, in the dialogue between Sri Krishna and Arjuna discussing yoga and science of God realization.